Okay, hang on. All right, chat away.
Okay, well, folks, here we are, season 2, episode 2. And where was I drinking? You know how it starts. We start tonight, folks, in Mississippi.
The mighty
at the
Miss.
Shack Up Inn. Clarksdale is where we're drinking tonight. Clarksdale is about an hour and a half's driving time south of Memphis in Tennessee, and Tennessee's a long, skinny biscuit of a state tucked into the mighty Mississippi on the far west-hand side. As the Mississippi goes down, it becomes the state line of Mississippi. And when you hit Clarksdale, that's where the two highways, 61 and 49 cross, and that's the spot they talk about as the crossroads in the blues world. Technically speaking, it's a little further, about 12 miles down the track and a couple miles closer to the river, but Clarksdale is really the home of the Delta Blues. And about 5 miles south of Clarksdale is the old Hobson Plantation. It's the first cotton plantation in America where they used a mechanised cotton picker. So these young lads have bought the old Hobson Plantation. They've bought the old gin where they separated all the cotton from the bolls, and they've turned the gin. They've roamed around the countryside as all the old buildings were demolished, and they've saved a whole dose of the shacks, put them up onto a truck and shifted them there to the gin, and they've made like a motel of old shacks. That's why it's called the Shack Up Inn.
That's cool.
And all these sharecropper shacks that used to have outdoor toilets and bathrooms, they've put like a rudimentary bathroom inside, and they've saved all the, and some of the walls have got a little bit of a gap here and there, but you get a bit of an idea what it would have been like to be a sharecropper back in the day.
Yeah.
If there's air conditioning and reverse heating, it's pretty rudimentary. That's been salvaged from an old boat or an old house. They've got an old a punt out the back that's called the fish camp that you can stay in, that they salvage from the Mississippi.
That sounds inviting, the fish camp.
Well, it's for fellas that want to, live out the back closer to the river. But the whole idea is each of the places has got its own name. We stayed in Electric Blue the first time because it was blue and had electricity attached. But these two lads have done a tremendous job, and they've bought the plot of land opposite, and they've put a few shacks on there now. And in the gin itself, they've got motel rooms downstairs and upstairs, and they've salvaged a heap of stuff. They've called the restaurant Rust, and they've got the High Church of the Blues in there is the bar. So it's one of the
interesting names that perhaps marketing people wouldn't have used, like Fish Camp and Rust.
Yeah, but when you go there, it
works.
You know what? And it's under the radar still.
Yeah. You always find those little gems.
Does an extraordinary job of doing a whole dose of blues festivals. Yeah, well, I read about it initially in a Blues Travelers blog, and first time I went there 15 years ago, it was I just keep going back. So I go for the Juke Joint Festival. So tonight, where are we drinking? Mississippi at the Shack Up Inn. Beer and breakfast.
That's awesome.
Okay. And sponsored.
I was going to say, what's happening on the headwear?
Yeah, Pete, Steve and Kyle down at the Butchers gave me one of their baseball caps. They were going to give me one of their own as a bit more authentic, but I said, no, I don't need all that fingerprints on it. But that's thanks very much for sponsoring the show. And tonight it's our first Trans-Tasman Zoom.
I know, it's pretty cool. And we've got we're very lucky to have Michael joining us shortly. That was great getting him, Jane. Well done.
Well, Mike Brajkovic, New Zealand wine legend, wine show, Mr. Chardonnay. When we were all at Roseworthy College in the same class, you don't realise till a few years down the track that, you're part of something quite special. I was the youngest that didn't know anything. I started at 17 at Roseworthy the college winemaking class. And technically I was underage for the wine appreciation, the sensory evaluation classes. But the fellas were all like older brothers. And we had Rosie Butler from New Zealand. We had Mike Brykovich, Chris Ringland, Martin Shaw goes on to Shaw and Smith, Roger Harbord, Rob Gibson, at the time was the grape grower liaison for Penfolds, knew every Grange vineyard in the valley. He's gone on to Gibson and Discovery Road. We had Pete Barry, Drew Noon. It was Nick Walker from O'Leary Walker. It was just like
incredible collection there, isn't it?
It was a bit of an all-star cast, and Mick was Ducks of the course and 6'10" and played rugby and all that good stuff. So yeah, that was Mick's story. But now here he is, Mr. Chardonnay. Mr.
Chardonnay, and we are. I mean, these wines are fantastic. It's exciting to see a lineup of Chardonnay that are so different. From the same producer. I can't wait to get him to talk us through some of these. It's really exciting.
Yes, because they're all from the 2019 vintage. They're all,
which I think was a cracker for most parts of New Zealand.
They're jumping out of the glass, and he sent them to us 6 weeks ago, so they're right over bottle shock, and it's going to give us a really great opportunity to have a look at 3 individual vineyards, including the vineyard they've got now at Hawke's Bay.
Hawke's Bay, yeah. So, and to be so diverse now, you're still in the North Island, yes, but those 2 regions are really different. So it adds such diversity to the collection.
Well, it's a 5-hour drive between the 2, 6-hour drive. So, and Auckland is way, way north, and Kumeu River's north of Auckland, and Hawke's Bay is down on the southeastern bay of the North Island, so completely different,
And I guess that's that terroir conversation that French doesn't own it. You get differences in the regions all over.
No, and also there's a lot to be said about the whole Anzac idea of taking our wines from this part of the world to the rest of the world, because what we do and what they do are quite complementary. And with what's going on in Tasmania as the kind of, halfway point in between. So there's a lot to be said about that whole Anzac idea of, taking our wines to the world together. So, yes.
We've got quite a bit to get through. Should we just bring him in now? Let's get cracking.
Zoom him in because it's 2.5 hours on in Auckland and he'll be just about getting ready for bed. Yeah.
That is true.
Old folks got to get to bed early.
Mike, I don't know how you feel about being called an old bloke.
We'll bring him in.
We can see your name.
You have to tell those Kiwis to start peddling over there. Get that internet cable underneath the Tasman going.
We're so close. We just need some unmute. There we go. And video. I can hear you.
You can hear me?
We'd love to see you.
How do we get the video? How do I join in? Do I share?
There'll be a little video icon.
It says join with video, Mick.
Start video.
Well, there you go. Hi. Mr. Chardonnay, love it.
Mr. Chardonnay.
So you went down to Dunedin, Christchurch last night.
Christchurch, yeah. We were showing these wines. In fact, we were showing these down at a few retailers in Christchurch, and they all know you very well, of course.
Rex and the boy.
Rex said to say hello, and I was able to take my daughter along as well, which was quite exciting because she's a student at Canterbury University. She's the first year down there, hadn't been to a wine like that. I think she was quite impressed, actually.
Yeah.
Well done.
It's always good to take her on a milk run, Dad, because you know the boys at Vino Fino are the best in the game down there on the Canterbury Plain.
They're really good.
Yeah, that cellar. Most folks don't realise they got a cellar down there, or like a mezzanine cellar that they do wine tastings in on every Tuesday night, and they've just got the most staunch wine club. So, yeah. So, Mick, tell us about these three. They're completely different, all 2019, all jumping out of the glass, but quite different. Yeah.
Well, 2019, as you thought, was a pretty outstanding around the country. But especially for us, I mean, you mentioned we're a long way north, but it doesn't get here because we've got the East Coast and the West Coast quite close by, and we get a lot of cloud cover, and that moderates the climate a lot. So in 2019, our maximum temperature was one day at 29.6.
Oh.
It doesn't get any hotter than about 30 most years, but that was a warm day. But most of the temperatures were in the 25 to 28 kind of range, and more importantly, it was dry. So we're able to get things right. The style of Chardonnay we've been making since the early 80s really, you know, it's modelled on white Burgundy, and I guess the Hunting Hill is the best example in this lineup of that style, because it's barrel fermented and has a lot of oak influence. But the village wine came about because we needed to have something to blend down to put the you know, the less good stuff into it, and that generated its own interest and demanded kind of its own grape supply, and so we had to plant vineyards for that and source some grapes as well. So the village wine comes from vineyards that are a bit higher yielding, so you don't get the intensity. It also doesn't get the oak. But in order to expand the production, this is about a 12,000 case blend. We had to go to Hawke's Bay, and so we actually purchased grapes in Hawke's Bay, and that accounts for about 25% of the blend now. So that's where we get the nice peachy and richer characters on. But the fruit,
and that's in that village wine, is it?
That's in the village wine, yeah.
Yeah.
So the fruit that comes from Kumeu, 75% of the blend, gives you much more of that earthy, mineral, slightly edgy character. Because, you know, we've been greatly influenced by the wines of Chablis and the Macon. I think that wine typifies that particular style, and for us, it's hugely popular. I mean, just it goes really well on premise. Retails here for less than $20 a bottle. So.
It's good that you can put wines like that in your collection that are a bit more accessible for people, so they still get, you know, these excellent style Chardonnays made by someone who knows exactly what they're doing with great fruit sourcing. And some of these other wines are more expensive and they are for more special occasions, whereas this is a great wine that you can, you know, sip on, enjoy on a more regular basis.
Yeah, that's the whole point. But we didn't want to compromise the very important techniques in making it. So the fruit of this is all hand harvested. I mean, we won't compromise on that.
And that's across the board for you, isn't it? You do that for all
really
of your
machine picking at all. Absolutely, yeah. So everything's picked by hand, everything's transported to the winery, and then a whole bunch pressed. I really like that as a technique because you get the best quality juice. You don't have to do a lot of separation of solids. Or if it does, it separates out very easily. And then we use all the same techniques as we do with all the other wines, except they don't get the nice barrels. They get the old barrels. There's about 20% old oak in that blend, and the rest is in the same still. But it gets all the wild yeast treatment, fermentations with wild yeast. And even in tanks, we like to have temperature fairly high. When I learnt winemaking with Jane back in Australia, we all went cold. You know? Everything was fermented 12 or 13 degrees, simply because we could. You know, we had the refrigeration to be able to do it. But I much prefer to go warm. These in tank at about 20 degrees. And they also go through 100% malo. So the malolactic fermentation reduces the acid to a nicer level. But even after that, you've still got quite firm acidity there. And
Can you just explain that?
None of the buttery character.
Yeah, can you just explain that for people who don't know what malolactic fermentation is? Can you just explain a little bit about that and why you would do it? And you know, you can do percentages of your blend that go through malo, so it's not, you know, it's not always all of the wine that will go on through that.
We aim for 100%. Sometimes it doesn't always work that way, but we certainly aim for it because, you know, the two main acids in grapes are tartaric acid and malic acid. And the tartaric acid is the main one that's the most stable. But in a cool climate, you can get quite a lot of malic acid as well coming in the juice. And here we get around about 3.5 grams of malic acid. So it's an acid that tastes like green apples. It's the acid of apples. The malolactic fermentation is a process where bacteria can convert malic acid into lactic acid. And lactic acid has one less acid group per molecule, so it's a less intense acid. It's also the acid of milk. So if you can imagine, you know, the acid of Parmigiano cheese, you know, the kind of sharp tang, but it's softer than the malic acid. So you have less acid, softer, but as a byproduct, the bacteria also produce diacetyl, which is the buttery character that we associate with malolactic. We used to have quite a bit of that in our Chardonnays, but we work pretty hard to get rid of it these days. So we do that by leaving the wine with the yeast leaves for a very long period of time, and the yeasts, even when they're dead, have been shown to consume diacetyl. So the more you can leave the wine with the yeast leaves, the less buttery it becomes.
See, that's why he's a legend, Kate. Listen to that. What a brain box. What a brain box. I used to hang around with him and hope that all that smarts would just rub off.
Well, now you are very smart in the world of wine. So what was it, like 30 years ago you became an MW, which is a grueling certification for the wine community. What, like there's 14 of you in New Zealand or something now?
Something like that, yeah. I haven't counted up recently because we haven't had any new ones.
No, it's bloody hard work. How hard was it back then, as a, you know, 30 years ago?
It was a bit easier than it is now, but it was still hard. I think
don't say that. Say it the other way.
No, it was. I mean, the tasting's pretty daunting, and that was, you know, the thing that really appealed to a lot of us because, you know, we thought we could taste wines and identify things, and that was the hardest part for me. The theory part of it, because, you know, being fairly recently out of college and having all that knowledge still stuck in your brain, I could regurgitate kind of essays on things, which went quite well. But in those days, you only had to pass the exam. These days, there's the exam plus a research paper, which is almost like a mini thesis, and it really takes a lot of time, and it's really quite difficult. And I take my hat off to the people who pass the exam these days. Yes, it was difficult back then too, but yeah, I would hate to do it now.
Hey, you know, you're talking about it as being your introductory Chardonnay, Mick, but it's jumping out the glass. It's got beautiful aromatic lift. If this is if this is an introduction to Chardonnay, it's got pears, it's got apples, it's got all that lift. It's super for prawns. It's super for seafood.
Yeah, it's well aiming, like I said, you know, that Chablis kind of lift on the nose, but then the texture is a bit more macone because it's got more richness. But, you know, that spectrum of Chardonnay flavours, and you mentioned, you know, pears and apples, you go back, you know, lime and lemon and orange peel, grapefruit, and then you go to the pip fruits, apples and pears, but then into stone fruit characters, white peach, yellow peach, apricot, and then into melon.
And they kick in as we go from the Rays Road to the Hunting Hill. They kick in and kick in again. Yeah.
Another layer, building.
But it's, you know, for $18 a bottle, it's got this lovely texture that's kind of like pillows of fruit, you know, and it's not a short palate. It's actually, you know, for $18 New Zealand a bottle, it's a bit of a cracker.
Okay, yeah. No, we sell a lot of it. It's probably a bit too cheap, but you know, we have a lot of it to sell too. So and we like to get it out there, and that is the kind of wine. Well, that is the wine I drink a lot of at home, because it's that style that just goes with all the kind of things that we like to eat as well.
And when you moved down to Hawke's Bay with Rays Road, how long have you had that vineyard down there, Mick?
Well, we're coming under a lot of urbanisation pressure here in Kumeu, and we can't expand our vineyards here, so we have to look elsewhere. And that's why we started to purchase grapes in Hawke's Bay. But we thought, no, we really need to get a foothold there as well. And we're just very lucky that this land came up for sale. It's a block that was owned by Trinity Hill Winery, and it had been established by them and in conjunction with Pascal Jolivet from Sancerre. So they had planted it mostly to Sauvignon Blanc, and we're slowly going about fixing that. But we're planting a bit more Chardonnay, and it's got some Pinot Noir on it as well. But the main feature of it is that it's a hill country block at about 180 to 200 metres. So quite a bit higher than the rest of the most of Hawke's Bay vineyards, and it's on a limestone hill. So you've got this wind-blown clay loess on top of limestone rock, and that's where I think it gets that character. Don't ask me to explain how it gets that character, but it's got a vitality, a kind of a zing and electricity on the palate that can only come from limestone.
Yeah, I've called it complex, but with zip.
Zip, yeah.
Yeah,
Zip,
it's got real.
Zip, yeah.
It's got
Zop,
a real. Yeah, it's got a real nice length of palate, but then it just goes zip straight through to the end, and I've got a real nice Anzac biscuit oats and butter nose on it. Really, really pretty. I know you've gone for more of the peach notes coming in, but I've got that really lovely oats and butter that you get with really good Anzac biscuits, homemade. You know, it's but it's the volume of aromatics, Mick. You know, how do you catch all that?
Well, I think it's just inherent in that particular soil type in that vineyard. One of the keys to it is not to pick it too late as well. That if you let it get too ripe, you lose a lot of that vitality. You actually want a bit of acid there. We bought the vineyard just in time for the 2018 vintage, and it was, you know, completely new to us. With that vintage, we picked the Chardonnay in two lots, one slightly underripe and one slightly overripe, and then blended them. But it was the underripe lot that just looked like Chablis. You know, looked like that oyster shell.
Yeah, right.
Salty, tangy, very, very interesting character. 19 is all in one pick, and it's a bit more straightforward, but Chablis certainly is the model. And to that end, we haven't used any new oak. This is 100%, I'm sorry, it's not 100%, it's 80% made in old oak and 20% in tank. I wanted to try the tank out just to see if it could retain a bit more of the minerality. And it does. But yeah, it's got that top note. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But from 2020 on, we've actually gone back to the barrels. We think the barrels do retain enough of that and give it a bit more richness on the mid palate.
It's got a really interesting, like when Mum used to give us fairy bread, you know, hundreds and thousands sandwiches. You know that when you get those hundreds and thousands starting to dissolve in your mouth, you get that little bit of a granularly light thing. Yep. It's got that right on the sort of tail end.
Yeah.
Really
lemon drop. It's that kind of what do they call that stuff? That powder. Not that powder. No.
Whiz fizz. Sherbet.
That's the one.
I knew you were groping for sherbet. Yeah. No, not that other powder, Mick. We can't talk about that. This is a family show.
We don't know what it is. You can talk about whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. It is really fragrant and fresh, but with that beautiful complexity.
Yeah.
That's a stunning wine. That is really beautiful.
We're getting a lot of good reaction to that, and particularly on premise as well. People are really enjoying it.
Yeah, if this was a car, mate, this would have very smooth curves.
Give us a make and model then, Joe.
If I had to, it's a Corvette Stingray, mate. It's got flares. It's not wings, it's flares. This is a very flary wine. But it runs a really nice line, and it's such a step up in complexity.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you really notice that difference
But
in that complexity.
We're talking $40 New Zealand.
Yes.
It's, you know, still not out of the realms. I'm putting it into pork belly territory. And also, as a pair, I made a big fat fish sandwich, folks. Look at that. That's a big fat crumbed whiting sandwich, and I think that sort of barramundi fleshy fish is going to go really nicely with this thing.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. The acidity is beautiful. Like, it really, and I think that's, you know, I'm reading on your website and a bit of information around, you know, how Chardonnay's aging and how, you know, you might design these wines to be able to do that. And obviously that's one of the components to how it can age. What do you see the potential? Is there a difference between the Kumeu River wines, estate wines, and Hawke's Bay, and how they will age over time?
I think there certainly is between the village and so the estate and the single vineyard wines from Kumeu, because we know how well they can age. For us, the Rose Road vineyard is a bit of an unknown quantity because we haven't got that experience, and we'll just have to wait and see. My suspicion is they'll be really good up to about 3 or 4 years and then start to develop other characters. And you probably want to be in there for that fresh part of it. Yeah. And that's certainly what we recommend with the village wine, because you're 1 or 2 years out, but it's fine. Yeah. They do hang in. But then once you start getting to the more complex wines, like the Hunting Hill, then they really are there for the long term, because they have more stuff going on in there to be able to develop and change.
And do you find, you know, Chardonnay is one of those varieties that is more malleable in the vineyard, in the winery? You can do different things to it. Do you typically do very similar techniques across the single vineyard wines, and then they just display differently because of where they come from, or how do you work the winemaking with them? Exactly.
The differences in all those vineyards becomes pretty apparent as you're making the wine, and it is all vineyard based, and no matter what we try to do, Hunting Hill looks like Hunting Hill every year, and Coddington looks like Coddington, and Maddie's looks like Maddie's.
That's so cool.
The only difference we impose on the wine is the barrels that we use, and they are chosen to reflect the characters that are coming out of the vineyard. So with the Coddington, for example, it's much richer and riper and has a lot more peach and apricot, so we use quite heavily toasted barrels. Hunting Hill is much more elegant, so we use barrels that have a bit of power, but they are much more restrained than the more smoky barrels that we use for Coddington, or even in the case of the Maddie's Vineyard. So we choose horses for courses, but the characteristics primarily come from the vineyard.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that.
But you said that you use wild yeast across the board, Mick.
Yes.
Why have you chosen that way?
Well, it goes back to a bit of experience I had in Bordeaux back in '83. I got to work the vintage for Jean-Pierre Moix in Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, and got to see the use of the fermentations for the first time, and thought, this is interesting, this is really good, quite different, and because I always thought that, you know, making a wine using a selected culture of yeast, you end up with a fingerprint on the wine that comes from the yeast. So when I worked in Coonawarra, for example, in those days we had 2 or 3 yeasts that we got from the AWRI on a slope, and multiplied them up and used those. But at the end of vintage, you know, you go and taste those wines, and it was easier to tell what yeast strain you'd used than even what grape variety it was,
Where the grapes came
or
from.
where the vineyard was. And I thought, the yeast is just too powerful. So the experiment of going into wild yeast ferments meant that the yeast character, in fact, retreated backwards, kind of stepped back, because it was more uniform. It didn't stand out because there wasn't one species or one strain of yeast dominating. And then, the character of the grape variety and the character of the vineyard starts to step
shine through. I didn't realise, and this is my ignorance not being a winemaker like the two of you, but I didn't realise how much impact that yeast strain, if you're using a cultured yeast, the impact it can have on the wine and how it draws out different flavours.
Yeah,
so I can see why you'd do that.
Yeah, there was a yeast strain called 350, which was very aromatic, and you kind of pick that on its fruity aromatics. And then 729 always had a bit of H2S, and there were a couple of others. 796 was always
passion
high.
fruit, and
passion fruit
was
characters,
really
banana
interesting.
characters, all that kind of stuff, which had nothing to do with Chardonnay or Cabernet or Merlot.
You can alter the wine almost. I mean, there's so many things you can do to help alter the wine, but I didn't realise yeast was one of them in that degree.
But that's only if you select a clone, basically one particular yeast strain that does the whole fermentation. When you have a wild ferment, you not only have a mixture of strains of yeast, of one species of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the only one left at the end, but you have a whole progression of other yeast species at the start, which contribute some flavours and some textures. But they can't tolerate alcohol, so by the time you get to about 4% alcohol, they're dead and something else has taken over. So you get a progression.
Yeah.
We know there are at least 4 or 5 species, and within each species there's lots of strains. We know with Saccharomyces we have at least 80 different strains coming out of our vineyard that are pretty much unique to us, because unlike selected strains of yeast, you're not cloning them, you're not reproducing them asexually. They're reproducing the vineyard. They're having sex in the vineyard.
I knew that would come up.
And becoming diverse.
I knew you'd finally get there.
I mean, it took 30 minutes, but we got there.
I knew he'd get there eventually.
Yes.
I'm going to bring it right back on track.
No.
Yes. Hey, because if we're at a half hour already, we need to talk about this Hunting Hill thing.
Yes, we do.
I've got honeycomb, baking bread oven, champagne yeast, lift, deceptive undercarriage.
What's a deceptive undercarriage?
It's got a deceptive undercarriage because you think it's going to be a mouthful of fruit and just finish, and it doesn't. It just keeps rolling along. Yeah, and it's got this apple acid thread, but it's got this lovely granular cream. I'm not just saying this because I want to impress you. I'm saying this because I'm not a massive fan of Chardonnay normally, and I got to say this has stopped me in my tracks. I really like the Kumeu Village.
Yeah.
I would put that on in a heartbeat with every salt and pepper, chili squid combo that you find in Australia without no problem at all. And I think that would hold up with a lot of Sauvignon Blancs. No stress whatsoever. It's just a really nice glass of fresh white fruit. It's great. But this is another kettle of fish now.
The layers and complexity here are insane. I mean, you just...
Did you actually make this, Mick, or did somebody else make it for you? No, I'm just joking. This is... I
was there.
Where is Hunting Hill, Mick? Where?
It's just across the road from the winery up on the hill, overlooking Maddie's vineyard. So it's very close to the winery, but it's a hill that doesn't face directly north. It faces... hang on a second. I'm just
that's so good.
You're on. You're good. No, you're good.
Yeah.
We've got you.
What was that? Yeah, it's just up on the hill, but it doesn't face directly north. It faces a bit south and a bit west, so that it gets the breezes off the sea. You can actually smell the sea there on a windy day.
Yeah.
And it has an iron pan about a foot below the surface, which is there. I don't know if it has anything to do with the way it tastes, but it is affecting the way the grapes grow. It is a very clean vineyard in terms of virus, so it has no virus at all. It's the first Chardonnay that we pick each year, but it always has the same characteristics. And on that spectrum of Chardonnay flavours, to me, it's really at the citrus end of things. So you get that kind of lemony character,
absolutely,
and white flowers. You know, they've got that lemon blossom, orange blossom type of character. The French talk about in Burgundy as well. So it's that white floral. But then in the mid palate, it's rich, and you get that vanilla and creamy texture. And then on the finish, it's beautifully acid and long.
It is just like, it hits you all over the place with all these different flavours, and the palate weight is so beautiful.
It's a bit of a it's actually a bit of a mirror.
Finish.
It's actually a bit of a mirror ball of a
It is
Chardonnay, because it just keeps spinning around, throwing another facet, you know.
Really?
And
it's a great descriptor.
I like that honeycomb thing that's happening in the middle palate too, without it being sweet. It's a really interesting piece of work.
And is that typical for this vineyard? Like, is that the type of complexity you see, or is this exceptional 2019?
Yeah, we do see those characters on a regular basis out of this vineyard, but in 2019 the volumes turned up and on everything. So
yeah, right.
It really is an outstanding vintage. I think it's the best.
How exciting!
We've made, and you know, it's just down to that vintage, and a bit of vine age and a bit of winemaker age helps, you know. So
did 2019 come in under average yield, Mick?
No, it's about average. Yeah, so it was good size vintage, you know. So we make a bit over 1,000 cases of this. It's about 1,200 cases.
How much comes to Australia?
A little bit. I don't know the absolute numbers, but yeah, that's not kind of my department. But
no, well, you stay with winemaking.
It is available.
Where would I know a lot of our punters want to buy the wine. Are they best to go onto your website? Because I think you can ship back to Australia, can't you?
We can. It's a good idea to go and have a look at the website anyway, because we do list, you know, distributors as well. But you know, the retailer in Australia that's probably stocks it the most is Dan Murphy's, and you know,
great.
Stores around the country they are there. Yeah. Sporadically, it's available in South Australia as well, but not to the same level. And yeah, but go and have a look on the website.
And buy direct if you can, because we always like that, everyone.
I did just quietly, this is going to cope with things like, no, you go.
I was just going to say someone's made a comment on the watching along live on Facebook saying winemaker age. I love it. So correct. Just having that experience with the vineyard, I think, has a real impact on how you manage things between vintages and what you do from one vintage to the next, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's having the confidence as well to know what you're doing is going to work. So when you start out playing around with wild yeast, there's a lot of trepidation and what's going to happen, what's going to go wrong. But you do it for 30 years, you kind of know what's going to happen next.
I don't think that can be underestimated, how important that can be when you're making those wines and understanding the vineyard, I suppose.
True.
Well, it helps that you own the vineyard too, and you can pretty much dictate its course right up to vintage. You know, you're not fighting anyone else. You get to give it every opportunity for the fruit to speak. You know,
that's true.
Yeah. Hey, you've mentioned a couple of times Mick Maddie's block. That's named after your dad, yeah? That's
right. Yes.
Yeah. Can we just give us a bit of because you've sent us 2 lots of wine, and we're going to bring you back in series 3. Thanks a million. And you've done something really special. You've got Maddie's block 10 years apart.
Yes.
So just if you want to just give the folks a sneaky preview, what's super special about Maddie's block?
Maddie's Vineyard's our oldest vineyard. It was planted on a site that was my father's first kind of mixed varietal block for the whole winery. He had Palomino, he had Barco 22A, Pinotage, Riesling Sylvaner, Cabernet, all sorts of different varieties that came into the winery and made his wine back in those days. Then we, in the 80s, decided to pull the whole lot out and graze it with cattle and really rework it. So we actually brought in quite a bit more soil, filled up a whole lot of the holes in the hill and the gullies, and a lot of limestone. So we have quite heavy clay soil here, which is very low in pH. And so we wanted to raise the pH of it. We used a lot of lime to do that. And then we planted it with Chardonnay because that was the variety that we were most interested in. But the best clone available at the time, or the best selection, was a Mendoza clone that had been virus treated. So it was ostensibly virus free. It ended up not being virus free, but more importantly, we had some new rootstocks from France that were much lower vigor. And in the past, our rootstocks gave the vine too much growing power, and so they grew too much and didn't ripen properly. Once we started to get these low vigor rootstocks, it enabled us to control the growth and get much better ripening patterns. And right from the first vintage, that vineyard showed up as being very good. So Dad planted it in 1990. It ended up really being his last project because he died in 1992, and the first vintage was 93, and we named it Maddie's Vineyard in his honour. And
we've got, Kate, got the 2009 and 2019, so we're going to have an opportunity to see that 10 years apart. So that's going to kind of be the full stop in the Chardonnay sentence, I think.
I think so. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think we're very excited and grateful that you've been able to share these wines with us. Amazing.
And it also, Mick, it makes us a truly international Zoomy Wine Chat show with you on the thing.
We're global now, Jane. We're global.
That's right. So,
global, using all this Zoom technology in this age of COVID, we're going into lockdown again. So, you know,
oh no, it's a bummer.
It's all a bit fraught here at the moment.
I've been following my good mates Vivace in Auckland, and they were earlier over the weekend. They were full house. They were running, full bore, and Jean and Mandy, big shout out to you guys at Vivace, and Vicky Roberts. You know who you are.
You know who you are.
Well, they're big fans of Australian wine over there too in Auckland. They're just really great operators, and it must be hard, Mick, to stop and start.
Yeah, well, to get a table at a decent restaurant in Auckland's been just about impossible the last few weeks. Now we've got this again. It's just devastating. But like the rest of the world, we'll get through it.
It's COVID flex, It's like this for now, but it's going to change.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So,
but 2020 as a vintage, I mean these 910s are pretty good. As Matt Kirby from Clearview said the other day, to quote a good Australian story, 2019 was there and looking pretty pleased with himself, and 2020 comes along and says, yeah, that's not bad, mate, but here, hold my beer, I'll show you how it's done.
It wasn't it Murray Till?
Was it?
No, Murray Till used to say that it's the next vintage is the best one.
Of course. But no, 2020 is, and we were lucky because we had an early season. We actually got all the fruit in before the lockdown. We even had all the reds pressed before lockdown, so we could just monitor ferments and that sort of thing, and they really are extraordinary. So we're very lucky to have two fantastic vintages in a row.
And with the with all the hand picking, do you have you got a problem with that with COVID, or you got teams lined up?
Well, we don't know yet because last year was last year. We'll wait and see. But we're in a nice situation because we're close to Auckland, and so close to a big population area where there are people available to do that sort of thing. Where do we have a problem is in Hawke's Bay, and getting enough people, because there's a lot of pressure down there because the big industry that's kind of taking over a lot of vineyard land at the moment is apples, and pickers can earn a lot more picking apples than they can with grapes, and so the ability to bring people in from the islands has been quite important down there. But we'll have to wait and see what happens next year.
You might have to be the picker and the winemaker.
We don't have to wait and see to know how these Chardonnays are going to jump out the glass. So I just want to say thanks a million for sending them over.
Pleasure.
Really
very lucky.
Kind of remember those days at Roseworthy because they were fabulous times, and it was an extraordinary group of people, and I really do like catching up with all of you guys from time to time. Like last year and in recent years, I've got to catch up with Steve Hall on a regular basis too. He was
angry.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a fellow alumni watching along on Facebook. Rob Gibson's watching.
Oh, good, Rob. G'day, Rob.
And Rolfie Binder's probably out there.
Yeah, really good group of people.
It was an exceptional year. So thanks, Jane, for lining up some great talent.
Oh, well,
I'm so lucky I get to try all the wines.
Well, they won't. They don't normally take my calls, so I'm pretty lucky.
But for a Zoomy wine chat show, why not?
The stories I could tell, Jane.
Well, Mick,
we might get you back for that.
If you want to start, you lead and I'll follow. Shall we start with your pruning project, or should we just leave it there?
No, it's okay. We'll leave that for another time.
Cool.
Oh, maybe we'll have to get him over. We'll get him over for the Christmas show.
Oh, definitely. Wouldn't that be grand? Wouldn't it?
And on that, next week, everyone tune in because we are going to have some news. I think next week we're going to share with you about a special event happening that you can participate in. So tune in next week. For sure. Yep. But in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing these beautiful wines. And Chardonnay lovers or people who are new to Chardonnay, go and get your hands on some of this. This is exceptional Chardonnay wines that can take you through from an entry point right up into these deluxe luxury wines. And try and go direct to the winery if you can. I know it's always appreciated, and we like to encourage that for all of our What Was I Drinking fans.
Yeah.
And join the mailing list. You've got a mailing list?
There is a mailing list. Just go on the website and subscribe. And, like I said, other people kind of look after that side of things. But I'm sure, all that stuff's available.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, a big shout out to everybody there. Like some Pete Barry as well. We've got to catch up with for their big anniversary with Jane as well. I mean,
the 60th.
Did you come over for that?
Yeah.
Oh, good on you. Oh, great.
Yeah. And he's selling himself short too because Mick was chairman of judges at the Adelaide show for a couple of years in a row too. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a big gig.
So anyone that's enjoyed Chardonnay tonight, season 3, we start in November.
Yeah.
We've got that look at Maddie's vineyard 10 years apart. So
fabulous.
Yep. All righty. Well,
that's
look
awesome.
after New Zealand for us.
Will do.
Yes,
see you soon.
Kia ora and all that.
Kia ora.
Love and Orch.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Virginia.
Take care. Good night, everyone.
Ciao.